Great. So we have our next speaker here, Raghav, or RG in the ecosystem. He's the trust and transparency lead at Protocol Labs, and he leads trust and transparency on the Filecoin Plus program, a public good and social experiment that aims to support storage providers to onboard verified data onto the Filecoin network. His work ensures that the unique subsidy called DataCap is not abused by various stakeholders within the Filecoin ecosystem. And also just want to inform everyone that we have more seats to the front, so no need to stand in the back or sit on the ground. Let's welcome RG to his presentation.
Thanks so much, Sylvie. Hi, everyone. My name is RG. I work on the Filecoin Plus program. Just by a show of hands, how many people here know about Filecoin Plus, have heard about it, so that I'm not going like too deep into what it is. Okay, I guess that's like more than 50% of the room. Okay, 70% of the room. I'll still kind of like skip over the initial slides. So for kind of just a brief overview, Filecoin as a network, trying to create a marketplace for decentralized storage. But some of the questions that come up when we think about, when these actors are trying to interact is, are the clients, what are the clients storing? Are the clients real? Are they storing real data? For service providers, there's concerns around centralization if we outsource things like KYC, and we also have a need for an incentive mechanism to hold them accountable. And from a storage provider perspective, we want to wait to get storage providers to care about storing useful data to be able to support all the other everything else that is being built in the network, things like compute over data or retrievals. So that is another important question. And then, of course, how do we support SPs and let them focus on what they do the best, and how can we take away some of the questions on the client side. So with that, Filecoin Plus is a layer of social trust on top of the Filecoin network. DataCap is this resource, which is a single-use credit that is kind of created on the go, and it is how we basically manage and try to answer some of the questions that I listed initially. So this is the dashboard that we usually use. There are many other dashboards that have been built by different teams in the ecosystem. We actually have the DMOP team right here, Kathleen. Thanks so much for doing what you do. I had hyperlinks, but I have a bunch of slides. So what I can do is there are specific questions about these data points. I can get into them. But broadly, you can go to this website and it has a bunch of information. Usually the network, when we hear about network growth, we see like these top level metrics, but there's actually a lot of interesting metrics. So when you go into the notaries tab or the clients tab, you can see who are the notaries signing applications. Are those notaries signing applications that are redundant? And then you can see patterns of collusion, and then you can further investigate, kind of like looking at their CIDs and seeing if they map. And so those are some of the work that we do to identify DataCap abuse. And this is another graph that kind of shows how DataCap adoption has grown up. So today, more than 95% of data being onboarded is through Filecoin Plus, which makes DataCap and the Filecoin Plus program a pretty significant kind of program within the ecosystem. So my focus is specifically on preventing DataCap abuse. And so before I talk about how we do that, I also want to touch upon what are the kinds of abuse that we're currently seeing in the ecosystem. And for some of you, this might be redundant because I talked about it yesterday, but I did add a few more things. So I kind of broadly break it down into acquisition phase abuse and spend phase abuse. From an acquisition phase abuse, we see people applying for app like DataCap, impersonating to be an organization. We see self-dealing between clients, notaries. We also see fake data samples, and so it makes really hard to assess, if clients are onboarding real data. From a spend perspective, we've recently started observing people are selling DataCap in secondary markets, which are happening off-chain. Also, spending DataCap for deal making with a single SP, which kind of goes against the principles of decentralization. And so what are we doing about it? So here are two platforms that you can kind of scan. The Starboard team has actually helped us build these kind of dashboards. These are work in progress, but essentially I'll dive into each of these in the further slides. So I'll just give everyone like about 10 seconds if you want to just scan and just like play around. And then I can dive into the specs and take questions if you have specific questions about the spec. Okay. So I'll give you a kind of like, as everyone's scanning, FIL Plus Canvas is more focused on thinking about risk scoring, whereas FIL Plus Watch is more focused on thinking about relationship graphs between the different actors. And so kind of giving an overview, these are slides created by David and Ed, so I can't take credit. So just wanted to give credit there. But here are some of the ways that some of the things that we're trying to understand as when it comes to relationships. So how is a notary connected to a client? How are clients connected to an SP? We want to kind of have easier ways to model that and visualize that. And also, some of these tools will eventually be used by the notaries. And so there's a big education component to this. But right now, we're mostly focused on making sure that the first version is out there so that notaries have a more objective way to assess and conduct due diligence. And so in particular, some of the ways in which we're thinking about anomaly detection, and these are some examples, is that, as I mentioned, you see collusion between notaries and clients. You also see clients repeatedly receiving DataCap from a similar set of notaries, which right now, the way the LDN v3, which is the large data set notary process, is designed, you need about 4 different notaries to give out DataCap, but there's still a lot of potential for DataCap abuse. And then finally, we also see that there's, as I mentioned, there's collusion between clients as well, just given how valuable DataCap is. So these are some of the ways in which we're thinking about anomaly detection. And then FIL Plus Watch is this tool that you can put in a client ID or you can put in a notary ID, and it kind of shows you, maps out the ways that they're kind of connected in terms of like spending or like allocation. And so this is eventually not only going to be useful for the notaries, but also for any community member who does not have to, who does not know how to write code. They can just go to this tool, do some analysis, and then participate in the due diligence process. And so I'm particularly very excited about this as we kind of roll out ways to automate DataCap, but also think about decentralizing the KYC process. And so finally, this is another tool that is kind of work in progress. A lot of this information can be manually figured out through the interplanetary dashboard that I showed, but we're building a tool in-house called the CID tracker tool, where you can get kind of just a map of deals distribution. And this is actually going to be a really useful tool for the network growth team as well, as they try to understand, how is the network growing, as well as doing granular analysis on like per client, per provider, and historical analysis to understand like the metrics that how DataCap has been spent overall. And then finally, I'm working with a team called Elementus.io. We're creating a new data pipeline for them to be able to address some of these questions that are listed here. We don't have an MVP yet because it took a lot of time for us to kind of get them started on the data pipeline. But again, these are some of the questions that we are trying to address. But then there's still current challenges. So as I mentioned, this specific challenge, things that happen off chain, they're really, really hard to detect. And most recently, for example, I blurred kind of personally identifiable information, but I recently got a Slack message from someone saying that they potentially, and like this is like we don't know if this is true or false, But these are the kind of messages that I've been getting about people potentially raising flags about DataCap abuse, and then them telling like how other parts of the network and like crypto economics are impacting their work, and FIL price impacting their business. So it's very interesting to see, as we're thinking about DataCap abuse prevention, what does that look like from a SP growth perspective, from a client growth perspective, and so all these things go hand in hand. And so with that, I would love any questions. You can find me on Slack as RG. Also happy to take questions, specific questions about the spec or some of the tools I talked about. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really curious about the anomaly detection part. I don't know if you can give a bit more details on, are you using the structure of the graphs, or what is the feature space there for the anomaly detection?
Yeah, so actually let's, do we have internet connection on this laptop? Yeah, so we created this spec which basically has about 10 different kind of things that are feeding into a score. Right, so you can see, for example, this particular ID has been scored 1 and XYZ. And so I think it's kind of like, we're using weighted averages and things like that to learn. Again, the tricky thing here is this is eventually going to keep getting better, because this is the first time we're ingesting this kind of data, right? And so a lot of this is like, I mean, when we created this IDs, we were like, this is like, we manually went and like identified this might be a high trust or low trust client. And so I think that's one of the ways. But to answer your question, I think eventually we want to do that by like the mapping and once we have enough data in the pipeline. But for now, this is kind of like how we're starting. I also like collaborate with solutions architects, for example, and say, hey, like, are there specific clients or IDs that who are high trust, or we can consider them high trust, and then feed this into the tool, and then note their behavior. And all of this is in the direction of us wanting to automate DataCap, because the approach that we want to take is we want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. So we don't want to kind of like police, which is very much the approach that we have today, where we are like kind of like going out and saying, hey, like, you're colluding or you're doing the wrong thing, where we give everyone the benefit of the doubt and like be able to understand their on-chain behavior. And so these are some of the ways that we can do so. And so with the mapping, for example, we can actually see a live demo here. So if I put down this client ID, you can start to see like how this specific client ID is related to the notaries and things like that, and then you can actually get granular level details. Well, this is not populated yet, and so I think those are some of the ways in which we are trying to improve the system. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Question at the back.
I have a question regarding the methodology that you're using. Did you consider something like some methodology, let's say from GraphML, that you would basically embed individual actors into like a node embedding, and then let's say something that you already detected as fraudulent, that you would compare these, based on the vector similarity, something like that? Like node to vec is like one approach that can be used for these kind of examples. Because it's a similar problem, let's say, like, as Gitcoin has with detecting symbols, yeah. Right? Did you think about those kind of problems? I mean, those kind of solutions, or has basically been this like the main direction of your research for how to detect fraud, basically?
Yeah, so I think this spec is, I would say, when we were creating this spec, it was based on like the kind of abuse we were seeing then. I think like it's interesting when like there's new kinds of abuse that we keep seeing. For example, like this spec does not account for things like, DataCap selling in secondary markets and things like that, right? So if you see, it's also like, as I mentioned, it's weighted. And so this is very much based on like seeing how notaries are related to clients. Clients are like dealing with SPs and things like that. So I would say that's so it's kind of from what you were saying, it's more the latter than the former. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And then just because we have access to this, I can also dive into the interplanetary dashboard. And so the kind of things, for example, that we can see from here, which is kind of like sometimes I use this, and we also use philfox.info to kind of see kind of very granular like address level relationships. So here, if I go to a client ID, I can, or like let's say a notary, I can kind of see, you know, like which like LDNs have they, one second, which like LDNs have they signed. And so like, you know, like all these applications, you can kind of see which, you already see, like for example, you already see that we have 50 notaries active in the program, but about like 10 or 15 are very active. And so that is another metric that we want to start measuring. And that's actually one from like an analytics perspective, that's something that we're pushing forward more to, is how can we measure in-program engagement and some of those things, which will eventually feed into how people become notaries. I think we have other members from the FIL Plus team. Through this right now, we introduce a leveling within the notaries election process. We are also building like a notary leaderboard so that we can gamify that system. And so I think analytics will be eventually very useful to kind of think about how are we learning from this process, because so far it's very much been like, oh, this notary has been responsive, this has been not, and like very much in Slack, which brings a lot of, you know, kind of opportunity for bias and error. So yeah. Yeah, CB.
Hey, RG. I just want to check, what would motivate a DataCap client to go through the process of get a DataCap application? Like, what would motivate them, right?
What would motivate a client?
Yeah.
I mean, they're getting free storage for one, I think so. But I think something that we have learned in the network overall over the past couple of months is that a lot of the BD is happening through SPs, right? And so like the SP is bringing the client. So I'm not sure if that's the direction of the question.
Because I feel that you know, DataCap application process is long.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's slightly complicated.
Yeah.
We, of course, at BD, we believe incentivizations help to motivate them, right? And so when you talk about incentivizations, it means that they're receiving incentives. And I think do it in a public manner. Mm-hmm. I think we all know that DataCap is being
abused.
Abused, yes, that's the right word. What we want to do is, how do we mitigate this abuse or prevent this abuse? And I think having a transparent process where you can track all this, that will help with the governance process. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I believe like incentivization is inevitable, at least at this stage where we want to try to onboard more data, right?
Yeah. I think it's trackable because everything is on GitHub. It's just that it's manual, right? Like if someone wanted to really like track, they can go and like look at the history, but we do need more automation throughout the pipeline. And so I think right now, as we're thinking about building a specific front end, a landing page called potentially FIL+.storage for clients, you know, then we can start automating and getting and understanding, you know, the client behavior and like where are they falling off, and then like improving the process there. Because I think we actually don't know. We haven't done like user research or user studies on clients, like what is the exact pain point. We like know broadly that LDN process is the pain point for them, but I think we want to work with designers and like kind of really understand where are they falling off and what are kind of the points of frustration. So Steph wants to touch on that. Yeah, so I'll be in touch with Steph for that. Yeah, I think we're running out of time, but thanks so much, guys.